Hello, everyone. I'm going to start by repeating something I've said before because I'm finding it to be very helpful in opening conversations with the younger generation. So I have said this before. More precisely, I've read this to you before. It's from the November issue of First Things this year, towards the end in the section called While We're At It, actually page 70. And it's a Gen Z writer. I know nothing about her except that her name is Freya India and she has a Substack newsletter called Girls. But this is what she wrote. It's hard to put this into words, but I think in some ways what we actually want is to be humbled. People say Gen Z follow these new faiths, namely social justice, climate activism and other urgent progressive causes, because we crave belonging and connection. But what if we also crave commandments? What if we are desperate to be delivered from something, to be at the mercy of something? I think we underestimate how hard it is for young people today to feel their way through life without moral guardrails and guidance, to follow whims and wishes of our own ego, and to be affirmed by adults every step of the way. I'm not sure that's actual freedom. And if it is, I'm not sure freedom is what any of us actually wants. I think that's a stunningly accurate account of where the younger generation are. Cultures go up and down in about 3 generations. It doesn't take long, certainly at the family level and at the education level. And we have really been through a bad patch, but I don't think it's irremediable. But it's going to take a lot of work on our part. What this young woman is getting at is that they don't have a big structure in their lives, and we need it. My favourite psalm to commend to students to get to know it well enough to be able at least to paraphrase it, if not recite it, is Psalm 73. And in that psalm, which I think is written by an old man looking back on his life, and he's at the stage in modern world of thinking back to when he went off to college, or it could easily be understood that way. And he says, at that point, as for me, my foot had well nigh slipped. And the reason? I was envious of the wealthy. If you ask young people today in medical school, a lot of them are there, and they're quite honest about it, because they want the income. And they've been so stroked that they think they're worth $500,000 a year. That's not a sustainable future. And this young man looked around and saw the people who cheat, the people who manipulate, they're the ones who win. And me, I'm trying to be totally honest, I'm trying to be good, and I'm getting kicked for it. And it's interesting, most commentaries put the turning point late in the psalm, but I think there are 2 turning points, and I think it's the first one that we need to be thinking about in our churches and in our families. And he was mulling this problem over and wondering whether he was going to become cynical. Then he says this, but if I say that publicly, if I say it to my family, my people I grew up with, the church I went to, I will break their hearts. And he couldn't do it. He said, in the King James Version, I will be untrue to the generation of those who loved you. He, fortunately for him, and I hope for most of you listening, and for some of you listening who have no such analogy, it does exist. You grow up in an environment where good people are trying to make their faith as central as they can. Sometimes they're dull and boring, but they're good people, and you know it. They couldn't, in many cases, define the word ethics, but they're ethical, whereas ethicists in medical school today, I've even met one who teaches ethics who said, I only teach ethics, I don't practice them. That's not good news. That's where we're at. But he said, I can't say that. It'll break their hearts. What saved him was good manners. And the fact that family love was real and community love was real. It wasn't sentiment. It was a way of life. young people today, the vast majority of them, lack any such foundations. As Freya India says, we get affirmed whatever we say we want to do. Whereas time and time again, what they're actually crying out for is, please, somebody tell me I'm off track and get me back on track. They lack family, particularly fathers. I mean, when you're little and you fall over and you get a raise, you run to your mom for comfort. But certainly when I was growing up in Birmingham, if you got in a scrap and you got a bit blooded, your dad would say, suck it up, kid, get along with it. That's the way life is. Don't make a fuss. There was a sense of, well, what is important, what do you have to learn, and life is tough. And now we have students who can take offence. They appear almost to come wanting to take offence. I think they're trying to provoke us into some sort of response that will say, look, do you realize what you're doing to yourself when you behave like this? Because you do become what you do. I mean, the wisest teacher of all time said, judge them by their works. Don't listen to the nice words. Go and look at their record. They might be a bit rough in speech, but then you find all the people in the house say, oh yeah, but he's a rough diamond. You can trust him entirely. We don't even have the idea of a rough diamond anymore, I don't think, although, I mean, in some ways, so, Denver, Washington, it does a bit of acting that fits that category at times. We're losing it, and it's not their fault, it's ours. The media is only the mechanism that the evil one has used to destroy us. We can push back on that. I've talked before, and I promised to someone that I will do a whole podcast on Haidt's The Anxious Generation. I'll write myself a note about that because I've forgotten to prepare it. I will do that. I don't remember any anxiety in medical school, but then, of course, there wasn't any need for it. And there's little need in medical school. We're so desperate for doctors that if you've passed the first 3 weeks and you're still alive, we're going to get you through to something. You're too expensive to throw away. But we want a decent doctor as well. That's about more than just being able to imbibe a handout and then regurgitate to the appropriate stimulus, which is what we currently call education. Let me illustrate what I'm trying to get at, because I'm not doing a good job, I know that. It's hard to do, but the very idea of learning, way back in the 1930s, and learn these quotations. They're worth having in your armamentarium. I use them all the while, and there's always somebody who's never heard them before, and for them it's important. And my friends who listen say, don't worry about repeating narrative and don't worry about repeating quotations. Of course, Jesus did it. He told those parables in multiple villages. And that's why everybody who followed him around learned them. And that's why 2,000 years later we can remember everything he ever said, if we're Christians. But you can't remember a single lecture from your university years unless you're very lucky. So this is what T.S. Eliot said. It's in a poem called Choruses from the Rock. And he says, where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? That step from wisdom to knowledge to information. If you're in medicine, many of you who listen to this podcast are, but those that aren't will probably relate immediately anyway. I say that information is a medical student. They can regurgitate their handouts for a little while. Knowledge is a resident who's got far enough to realise some things are more important than others and is beginning to get them into some sort of structure. And wisdom is what you hope you'll get at the end of your life. But if we go as we're going at the moment, you're more likely to get a needle you didn't really ask for and bye-bye. That's not a world getting richer, that's a world getting poorer. Going even further back to another quotation that I use again and again and again, and you should learn it too. It was a turning point in my life, taking me from the ivory tower to what I do now, for which I'm very grateful. But it comes from the 12th century, Bernard of Clairvaux. He says, some seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge. There are a few of those in first-year medicine, but not many. Most are just there to get through. Others, and that, says Bernard, is curiosity. And I indulged my curiosity about biology and science for a good many years. It's not bad. It's not adequate, but it's not bad. The next one, we're beginning to slip. He says, there are others who seek knowledge in order that they themselves may be known. That's not good news, is it? That's really bad. Some seek knowledge in order that they themselves may be known. That's vanity. From that time onwards, I call my CV not my curriculum vitae, but my curriculum vanitas. And you see it. I mean, so many second-rate academics, they look at a paper of yours with you, that the first thing they do is look at the references to see if they're quoted. That's vanity. And it creates all sorts of horrid behaviour. I mean, you see it in sporting players, in public. My attention was drawn to the nonsense that's going on in women's basketball. I've never watched it before, but watching the really terrible behaviour that's going on at the moment, and it's all about me, you're putting me down, you're making me look worse. There's no capability of looking up. What on earth has happened? I mean, one of the pleasures of life is getting to listen to someone in an intimate setting, say having a meal, and being part of the people there, and there's people there who are educated to a level that you can hardly imagine. That's something to enjoy, to remember, to set as a standard, to move somewhere towards that. But no, it's all, because everything comes back to the me, there's no bigger picture. We're in trouble. The next one in this list, it gets worse. Some seek knowledge in order to sell it. That is dishonourable. We're all vulnerable to that in the modern world, because that's no longer wrong. That's something wonderful to do. It's amazing how we think that some people who are working at useful jobs need to have money taken away from them if they're successful. We never say that about people in the entertainment industry or sport. We need to ask what that's telling us when people who are making jobs for hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes millions of people, are a routine focus of envy. The other two groups, they get adulation. I don't understand what's going on there. But doing things in order to make money is not a good modus operandi. It's not going to take you to a good place, because fundamentally you've got to make things, or you've got to do things, or provide services in a good way. And that's where the focus should be, not on the money. The money comes or it doesn't. It's not a big issue in our modern world. I mean, the one thing that's really happened in my lifetime is the incredible increase in the wealth of the general population of the world. A third of the world have been lifted out of abject poverty in my lifetime. Now, there's still work to be done, but the places in Africa I know, except where there's a war at the moment, they're poor, but their income is 300% greater than it was when I was young. So is mine. But they are keeping up. They are making a little progress, but not as much as they would like, for reasons that we might get round to discussing. Selling your wares is easy enough to do if you're in research medicine and you happen to stumble on something that has commercial consequences. You have an opportunity to make money, but you better be careful about that. It's not good for your soul to make that the priority. I have done it, and I wish I hadn't. I understand the temptation, at least. And it's not intrinsically wrong, is it? But it's not something you'd like to talk to Jesus about. And then the fourth one really stopped me in my tracks. There are some who seek knowledge in order to edify, in order to build up others. That is love. Bernard's definition of love. It comes directly from Christ's one, the killer definition of love for a Christian. If you love me, keep my commandments. And then the last thing he does before he's crucified, so to speak, is to wash the disciples' feet and then say, you call me Master and Lord, and you do right, for that is who I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, wash your feet, what ought you to do? That's a no-brainer, isn't it? We've got a long way to go. There are people like that in almost all churches. They may not be articulate, but they're kind. And it's not a kindness that's put on because they're not even aware of it. That's who they are. I mean, Paul knew what was going on. It always, I suppose amuse is the wrong word, but it does amuse me when he's making his list of sins in 1 Corinthians. He puts gossip next to murder. He's not wrong, is he, in terms of the damage that's done. Murder is usually an act of passion. I mean, nowadays we are professional criminals. It's a different matter. For most of human history, murder is an act of passion, and it's someone who you know and love that kills you, and that loved you at one point. And they're usually repentant afterwards. But gossip, it's got a nasty streak to it. And we all do it in one way or another. We say things that have innuendos that we need to repent for. And again, not easily done. Don't let someone who's done you a harm make you worse by your response to it. It's bad enough to have been the recipient of harm. It's worse still to have been the cause. So that kind of discussion, modern student hasn't had. You can ask any student, in your 4 years in undergraduate university, did the word wisdom ever come up? Did you actually ever feel that you were wiser at the end of the day? Knowingly feel that? I've yet to meet somebody who immediately says yes. The best can say, I hadn't thought of it that way, but there were bits of that, yes. And often they got nothing to do with immediate learning. One of the most important things said to me in my early years in residency was I was guilty of intellectual pride. The senior resident said, the bedside is no place for intellectual pride. And he was absolutely right. I never forgot it. I've forgotten his name, but I've not forgotten what he said. It's true. There are higher things, and if they don't dominate, your life will not be well structured. Now, the ancient world understood that incredibly well. The oldest writing we have contains key elements. I call it the 9 questions, which I think I originally got from Peter Crave, but it may or may not be true. But we don't even know who wrote them down, but they were certainly familiar to the Greeks from 6 centuries before Christ. Everybody needs a way of life and an understanding of life that answers these 9 questions. Where do they come from? That is now much more of an important question than it was even a few years ago. Because now things like the Webb telescope are changing cosmology before our very eyes. A steady build-up from chaos is no longer an option. It's over at that level. They don't want to even use the word that might be the description, but most of you listening to this podcast know what the word is. Same is true of molecular biology. The fact that we have that incredible strip of code 2 meters long in every cell in our body that's sufficient to give a basic structure to the body. It's not entirely sufficient, and it's all done with a 4-letter alphabet and 3-letter words. And it can be overwritten and still both messages read. This is just mind-boggling. And the other area in the same thing, of course, is the stretch from inorganic to organic. We've had 50 years of money wasted on origins of life research with no real questions and no real progress. It certainly won't come from chaos. James Tour is doing a wonderful job challenging his colleagues on YouTube, and they're running away. No, the idea that it started in chaos and gradually evolved is dead. Concilian's, E.O. Wilson's tome was praised by those who wanted evolution to be true, but the book failed because you cannot evolve a way of life that makes self-sacrifice, patriotism, dying for others. One of its central features, one of the things that really stops us in our tracks, what brave people do under awful circumstances. There's no explanation for that. Something is deep within us. Good. The image of God. So we need to be asking those questions, posing those issues to particularly the young people, and talking about the answers that we've discovered work in a really satisfying way. Family is central. My wife understood that much better than I did, and that made the dining room table central in our lives, and all our children have said that, and taking us to Africa have been the most formative things in our family's life. Now we've just heard that, our third great-grandchild is on the way. That's wonderful, isn't it? I had no idea how wonderful it was until it happened to me. So, what's happening to medicine? Well, there has been, over the years, a steady increase in recognition by some well-educated, thoughtful people that ethical standards are dropping. When I went to medical school, there were no lectures in ethics because at least everybody knew the Bible, which is the best ethical textbook there is, because it doesn't pontificate. It lays out a narrative which clearly has a moral basis. Medicine is essentially moral at its heart. When a patient comes to you, they don't have to take your advice. So what are you doing? You're helping them to decide what they ought to do. And that's a moral discussion. It's not based on physical facts. The same facts in different settings have different meanings. But the deeper understanding, the moral meaning, is real, unchanging. Medicine is at heart a moral activity. You don't hear that said, very often anyway. But around, 50 years ago, something like that, late 70s, early 80s, there began to be an interest in ethics again. The only ethics lectures I had when I was a medical student were arranged by the Christian Medical Fellowship in the UK. They were narrative, and I don't remember much of the content except the models. The people who gave the lectures were not philosophers and ethicists. They were physicians who'd been good physicians, and they talked about what helped and what didn't. And that, of course, is what ethics do. And back to where I started this talk with Freya India, what if we're looking for something that dominates us, and what if that something is a natural good? Now, for the Greeks, the objective of philosophy was to discover what the good life is. And they're not alone. The Jews had the same thing, only it was put more didactically. When Moses teaches the children of Israel in Deuteronomy about the Ten Commandments, he says that God said that when he'd spoken the Ten Commandments to Mount Sinai and the people had said, "We will obey," Moses recounts that God said, "I have heard all that this people have said. Oh, that they should have such a heart and mind as this to keep my law, that it might go well with them and their children forever." Keeping the law is not oppressive. It's a foundation for freedom. The modern student, again, as Freya India recognizes, are being affirmed at every level. Freedom is being allowed to do whatever you wish. That's not freedom. Ultimately, you end up in anything but a free state, addicted to drugs, alcohol, and sex. Not good news. That's slavery. True freedom, as Acton put it beautifully. Freedom is not the freedom to do what you wish. Freedom is to do what you ought. And that, of course, causes shudders amongst many of the more radical liberals. You proposing there's something out there that I ought to do, They're so full of themselves they can't see that we really are creatures, and creatures that need some guidance. You only have to look at the lives of people who are said to be so successful that you wouldn't want to trade yours in for theirs, I hope. So that's where we're at the moment. Freedom for or freedom from? Most, again, Freya India is saying, maybe we're looking for something bigger than ourselves. Maybe we do want some commandments from something beyond ourselves. Yeah, there are good conversions going on. Slow burns are the best, in my view, in many ways. I mean, yes, God can move very quickly when he wants to, but most often he seems to prefer the slow burn approach. We just need a lot more of it at the moment, and that will mean that those of us who say we believe have got to think a lot more about how we present what we say we believe. It's fun as well, by the way. There's nothing more satisfying than meeting someone who says to you, I met you on such and such an occasion and you said such and such. I have no memory of either. But for them, it was a turning point. I mean, that's enough to bring tears to your eyes. In fact, tragedies and disasters and accidents, I can do triage. But someone giving an account of their coming to real faith and finding that you have even a minor role in it, I find that much more moving than anything else I know of, because it has eternal significance. So I guess what I'm saying to you is think about these things and work away at what you can do to make it better. Now, a book I'm reading at the moment is along these lines. It's called The Disappearance of Ethics by Oliver O'Donovan, who's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. I met him only once, and I was awestruck. I bought his book then 25 years ago, another one. I never finished it. I will go back to it. I'm perhaps ready to do it. But this one is called The Disappearance of Ethics, and it's the Gifford Lectures from a year or so back. And the easiest place is, amazingly, I think it's in that same issue of First Things at the Freya. Yes, it is. There's a book review of it in this same issue of First Things from August, September for this year. What a title, The Disappearance of Ethics. Now, we're having more and more ethics lectures that we never used to have, but ethics is not going up, it's going down. And he explains why. And I'll say more about this next time. I think this is a sort of trailer, if you like. There are three key ideas that he puts forward as to why this is happening. And the first is that you can't talk about the good in the way that the Bible would and that the Greeks did, because modern students don't know that usage. It's astonishing, but he's right. They've been flattened out. They have no peaks and valleys. The peaks being when you occasionally get a wisp of a picture of what is to be, and it's good. That's the good we're talking about. As John says, when we see him, we shall be like him. Lewis has a sense of just how incredibly powerful this is. I mean, in his wonderful little book about the bishop going to heaven and not liking it and wanting to go back to Tooting in London on a wet and dreary day because heaven is too much. Yeah, Lewis understood the grass is green, so green it's almost overwhelming. You need to be prepared for it. The hierarchy of values that he sees immediately is so much better than anything he could have dreamt of before. That's the first step. to have some vision of how a good thing would look. And of course, in that process, looking at yourself is not good news, and we're not very good at handling that kind of news about ourselves, because the only way forward is repentance. There is no other way forward. And many of our churches don't even bother with repentance anymore, and those that do have it tend not to stop and think. That's why I love the opening prayer of the old version of the Book of Common Prayer in the communion service. O Lord, unto whom all hearts are open, all desires known, from whom no secrets are hid. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of your Spirit. If I was a pastor, that or something very like it would be the first thing that happened every Sunday. And it would happen slowly. That's what we need. That's the starting point. Real ethics wouldn't be necessary if we were good. Therefore, it follows, since they are necessary, we're not good. And how do we deal with that? So that's the first step. The resurrection of thinking about immaterial things. You see, we have become, and O'Donovan lays this out, how beginning somewhere, he says, around the 12th or 13th centuries, we have steadily moved our society away from immaterial goods, love, faith, justice, honour, truth, towards things that can be measured. And it's been a disaster. Kant was a disaster, and he shows you why. So that's the first step in the disappearance of ethics. The second one, so that's the loss of the basic framework of the good. The next framework we've lost is a framework of time. When men cease to fear judgment, we have a problem. Hippocrates and his colleagues understood that. They knew that one of the best tests of a good doctor was that he needed to fear giving an ultimate account for his behaviour. If he didn't have that fear, he himself should be feared. Your doctor does not fear God. Increasingly, you need to fear your doctor. He might kill you, and he can do that. There's no question. Legal killings are going up. Other killings will go up too. It will eventually show in the statistics. Canada now leads the world in official killing of patients with the blessing of the culture. Well, no blessing at all. The culture doesn't even know what a blessing is. So that's the second one, the lack of an eternal perspective. And the third one is the death of purpose. Without that bigger picture, purposes become trivial. Now, this has not been a happy podcast, has it? But I hope it causes you to think, to take the appropriate steps to put things right. Do send me a note. Highly critical, doesn't matter. I will learn from it. The blessings on you all.